I have a new video for you today. Today we're making carrot cake jam. Thought I'd introduce myself. My name is Mary and I live in Toronto, Canada. I have 2 young children, a 2.5-year-old and a 6-month-old baby, and I'm currently on maternity leave. Because I'm in Canada, that means I'm off for about a year. I started this channel because I really like watching other people who are doing gardening, harvesting, pantry tours, cooking, canning, preserving, all of those things, and I really wanted to share my experience. I'm a working mom, and so I don't have the same skill set that a lot of homemakers or homesteaders have, but I am trying and I am learning. This recipe comes from a Bernardin canning book. I've tried a number of their recipes that have all turned out. This one for carrot cake jam has pear, carrots, and pineapple as the main ingredients, with cinnamon, clove, and nutmeg as the seasoning, and of course, sugar. So here I'm just getting my jars ready. I always have them boiling as I'm preparing everything else because I find bringing this large pot to a boil takes a while. So starting right from the beginning, I wanted to let you know I misread the recipe and did make a small mistake, but the jam turned out because I was able to sort of fix it as I went along. So here I'm starting to prep everything because I thought I had to add all the ingredients except for the pectin to the pot at once. Now I was supposed to not add the sugar till the end, but I did cook it in with everything else. I was able to avoid disaster because I know that adding the sugar in at that stage, along with cooking the fruit, especially that pear, was releasing natural pectin. So I only added in half the amount of pectin in the end, and it really saved the jam. So it all turned out. I know it may seem like an odd time of year in the middle of winter to do some canning, and I wanted to share why. I love to do canning in the summer when I have harvest from my garden or from family members' gardens, but I also like to do canning when things are on sale. And I found these pears and the carrots on really, really good sale, like cheaper than they are at the height of the summer when they're in season. I also have a toddler who's obsessed with jam, so making sure I always have some on hand is a great idea. So as you can see, I've peeled and grated the carrots, and now I'm getting the rest of the ingredients ready. I wanted to do the pears at the very end because I was worried, because they're so nice and ripe, that they would oxidize really quickly. I pulled out the stick blender here because the recipe actually called for crushed pineapple, but I only have tidbits and I'm using what I have. I'm adding bottled lemon juice here. A lot of canning recipes have this to make sure that the pH is right, so it's really important that you don't skip it when you're doing home canning. Next up, I'm going to add in the spices. So I'm starting with cinnamon, and it's the only one that I measured according to the recipe. This recipe also calls for nutmeg and cloves, and in another recipe, a zucchini relish I tried in the summer, it also called for nutmeg, and the quantity just absolutely ruined it, like to the point it was inedible, and that had been with zucchinis from my garden. So a lesson learned for me was to kind of freehand some of the stronger spices to my taste, or what I think my taste will be when we go to eat the jam. And we did try it last night, and freehanding was definitely the way to go for us. Here I'm measuring out some sugar, and then I'm actually going to use this container that has a measure on it to do the rest of it. It was 6.5 cups, so now I'll just measure using the container to the 6-cup line and then fill it back up. I've done this before, and it works really well. It's faster than measuring out 6 cups of sugar at a time. Here I'm moving on to the pears. These are my last step. I have to peel, core, and slice them. I struggled a little bit. I always use like a potato peeler for my pears. I know a lot of people have the knife skills to peel it with the paring knife, but I can't. And I kind of got stuck some places because the pear was so ripe. But man, these pears were really delicious. They were Bartlett's, and here in Canada, I know prices vary everywhere, but they were 99 cents a pound, which is like as cheap as these get. That was cheaper than I've seen them like in pear season in the late summer, early fall. I bought a bunch of them. I had 5 because I really had no concept of how many pears I would need for this recipe. I think I used maybe 2.5, and I used the rest of them to make some puree for my baby with the leftover carrot and pears, and that puree went down so well last night. She absolutely loved it. If you're new to canning, I suggest that you start with jam. I find it the easiest of the canning things that I make, especially if you make a single fruit jam like a strawberry or blueberry, without as many ingredients as this one, but I find them quite forgiving and straightforward, and there's fewer steps than, say, making a salsa. Here's all my ingredients in the pot, and as I turn it on, I'm also going to make sure that I bring that water in my canner up to boiling to make sure my jars are nice and hot, because you want to add hot jam to hot jars so they don't crack. You also want to get your pectin ready for when you want to add it, so they suggest cutting it and keeping it upright so when the stage comes to add it, it's all ready to go. You can see the foam on this is from the sugar being cooked in with the jam. This is why you want to make sure you use a big pot, because that foam will really burn you. It'll smell terrible if it boils over and is a fire hazard. You want to make sure you stir your jam quite often. This cooked for about 20 minutes, I think, and you want to make sure it doesn't stick to the bottom and burn. So because I made that mistake and I'm cooking it with the sugar now when I wasn't supposed to add the sugar until the end, what I'm going to do is a gel test to see if the pectin from the pears has helped my jam set up at all. So what you do is you take a cold spoon, you dip it in, and you see how it drips off. If it drips off and drips, or if it sheets, if it goes in sheets, then it's gelled. This isn't quite a sheet, but there is some gelling. So I decided to add half the pack of pectin. You boil it for 1 more minute, and then you stop cooking the jam. And now it's time to jar. I like to work with 2 jars at a time so that my jars remain hot. Hot jam goes on hot jars so they don't crack. I like to use this to fill up my jars. It helps me measure a 1/4 inch of headspace to help ensure proper canning. I try to give the jam a bit of a stir, especially one like this that has chunks, so it's got that grated carrot and the pieces of pear and pineapple. Even though it's broken down a bit, there's still chunks, so I try to stir it up a little as I ladle it in so that I don't end up with one jar that's really kind of like the juicy gel and one jar that's like really pulpy solids. Once I've added in all my jam, I use a knife to get rid of the air bubbles that may have come inside. I'm not 100% sure if this is necessary, but my book says to do it, so I do it. When I was washing these jars, I made sure to really double check to see if there was any cracks or imperfections, especially along the rim. If there's any and you have it in that canner, it can split or explode because pressure is building up and forcing the extra air out. That's what the water boiling canning process is. And so any imperfections in the jar can actually be quite dangerous. I was lucky and found these jars on the side of the road with a sign that said free mason jars. I took 4 dozen of them, kept 2 for myself, gave 2 to my mother-in-law. We did find a couple jars in there that were cracked, but it was a really good find. Mason jars are quite expensive, and they're a really big initial investment when you start canning, but you do reuse them over and over and over again. One caution I would make is against buying your jars at like a Value Village. Every time I've seen them there, they are way overpriced for what they are. It would work out that you would spend more on a used jar from Value Village than buying a new dozen jars, which in my area often go on sale in the height of summer during canning season. So that's a great time to look and stock up if you think that you might take up canning. Even if you decide that canning isn't for you, I use my jars for a ton of other things. I put things in the freezer in jars. I take them to my bulk store that allows me to fill up my own containers to bring things home. I put leftovers in them. I share food with friends in them, and I don't necessarily need them back. So having a lot of jars on hand isn't necessarily a problem unless you don't have space to store them. After filling the jars before they go in the canner, you tighten the rings to what's called finger tight. So it's a happy medium between super tight and kind of loose. They go into the canner for processing. It's important to remember that your processing time starts at a hard boil, so not here. You need to really make sure it's a nice rolling boil like this. Then you put your lid on and you start your timer. This one was for 10 minutes. A lot of jams are 10 minutes. Once your timer has gone off, take the lid off, turn off the flame, and leave it for 5 minutes to sit. And that's when you can take your jars out of the canner. After they've rested for 5 minutes, it's time to remove them. So I like to put them on a baking sheet that has a towel on, so it's easy to move them again if I have to. I pull them out upright without jostling them too much. And once I have them all on this baking sheet, I cover them with a towel just to help them to cool evenly. This jam is such a pretty color. I'm so excited. So here I am letting them rest, and after they've rested, this is what they look like. I did have some jam that wasn't enough for a full jar, so I put it in a small jar for us to do a little taste test once it cooled. So here is a look at that jam. It was a really nice texture. I love this as my sort of jam consistency, and it was really tasty. Thank you for watching today's video. Please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you back for the next one.